So to give a bit of history to the camping ban and how it came about 30 years ago, there's a big situation you might have heard of called Occupy that went on down in Civic Center Park. Now, prior to Occupy being there and camping that place, there was homeless individuals who slept on the 16th Street Mall. The downtown, okay, this is going to be kind of fragmented, but the Downtown Denver Partnership owns kind of the business improvement district down the 16th Street Mall and some of the surrounding areas. They approached the city with some legislation to basically evict the people that sleep on the mall. This is the unauthorized camping ordinance. Now, it became a favorable piece of legislation in the city council because Occupy was going on at the same time. And through that, they found a lot of strength. Now, there's a lot of issues here. One, in that these capitalist businesses basically came out, decided that the aesthetics of their establishments were not as pristine as they want them to be, and approached Albus Brooks, who's a city council member here, to basically draft something in conjunction with him to remove the homeless rather than find out a better solution. Now, this went through a committee, I think the Transportation and Land Use Committee, which is an inappropriate committee for it to be in, and was passed very, very quickly throughout the committee, which is, for city council pretty unprecedented. And then it went into vote and passed. All this happened within a month. Within a month, this citywide piece of legislation that effectively banned sleeping outdoors went through in a month. Now that, if government worked like that for a lot of things, we'd be a lot further along, I think. But when it comes to fear and security or things of that nature, I guess they get us through really quickly. Now, some issues here that also crop up is that the Business Improvement District and Downtown Denver Partnership, they are some of the major funders for the Denver Road Home. And for those who don't know, the Denver Road Home was a flagship project made by Hickenlooper and Jamie Van Leeuwen back when he was mayor of the city, and was supposed to solve the homeless issue here within 10 years. Now, 8 years later, and clearly there's still issues. In fact, there's more homeless here than there were before, and an equivalent amount of shelter beds. But so there's a conflict of interest here. There's a conflict of interest in that the people who want to criminalize the homeless are also the people who are funding the services and shelters. So they have somewhat of a stranglehold on the city here, and they almost dictate what the service providers can and can't do, what they can and can't say. So there's problems there, like, for instance, if we want to overturn the camping ban, the city council needs the support of the city. The city, while the individuals will come out and say that, yeah, the camping ban is bad, the service providers won't. And the service providers are the gatekeepers towards what these people see as the most effective solutions to handling the homeless issue here. So we're in this kind of weird quasi-space where we really are being affected by capitalist natures and capitalist business interests over morality, over ethics, and essentially bringing these things forward. And they're going to bring more laws. This is not the end of it. The Sit Live was not the beginning of it. It started back probably in the late 80s, and now it's still progressing year by year and more laws. I mean, Boulder itself is experiencing these issues as well. And, it just is what it is. But, so one of the solutions that has come about, and there will be people talking about other solutions, is a homeless bill of rights. And I believe Therese will be speaking about that more in depth. But that is something that I feel will be effective in stopping the city and bringing more and more criminalization against the homeless. Yeah, and we'll talk about that later. But I recently had an experience in Boulder. I went there with my friend Therese here, and we went to the library to pass out flyers, essentially to go to the city council meeting for the homeless individuals here to rally support against the social misbehavior laws and that are going through. And while I was there, there was a gentleman who was being accosted by a security guard. It started out, fairly tame as far as harassment goes, but escalated really quickly. He came up to him, told him, "Get up. You can't be lying down. It's all well and good." He noticed he had like a penknife which is actually legal in there. It was under 3 inches. And I casually mentioned that, hey, you have a gun, man. Like, how can you tell him not to bring in that knife when you have a gun on you? He immediately turns around to me, starts cussing at me, tells me to shut the fuck up and to get out. And so I'm a little bit volatile sometimes, so it progressed from there really quickly. Essentially, though, after 15 minutes, I was on the ground with about 8 cops around me, and the other gentleman had already been arrested for trespassing and for some other charges. So what I see in Boulder, and I was only there I was there an hour before this happened. What I see happening in Boulder is this crazy increase in police power and police. And a lot of things, really. I mean, it's just kind of like corruption in general. And I don't know what to say on that. I don't live there now anymore. I did live there for about a year, and I had quite a few run-ins with the police. I think there was one cop there that was cool who was named Ramos, and the rest of them were pretty much just looking to power trip all day. And that's a generalization, but, I see problems with it. Anyways, for those who are interested, we do have a sign-up sheet for different things for Denver Homeless Out Loud. There's a lot of different projects we're involved in. It's not just one thing. There's a lot of things going on in this town. Another, for example, if you read the Westward last week, is the tiny house that we've been building. Essentially, it's an idea to bring the homeless together to be able to build their own houses. I feel like Denver Homeless Out Loud represents kind of a third option rather than shaming people into a position or to request from higher powers to come down and do something. We are instead empowering ourselves to figure out solutions to these problems. And, yeah.
Excuse me, when is your meeting?
Our meeting is every Wednesday from 4:45 until about 7. So right now is when the meeting will be going on, but we're here tonight. So. We also have... Sorry?
Where is it located?
It's located at the American Friends Service Committee room over by King Super. I can give you more specifics when we sit down if anybody wants to know the exact location. You can also go to our website, denverhomelessoutloud.org. We have a Facebook page as well. All the information's on there.
Is it still across the
Yeah, it's like you got the supermarket thing on Spear and 14th, and then it's like right here in this building. Yeah, and the bottom level, and like the second door to the left as you walk in. Yeah.
Benjamin,
Yes.
when the Denver camping ban was passed, do you know how much effort was made by the service community to stop the ban before it went through?
Sure, yeah. A large amount of the service community came out because there's a commission formed by the mayor probably about 10 or 15 years ago called the Homeless Commission to the Mayor or whatever. And it's made up of the heads of all these different service providers. Now, the mayor has never called this commission together until the camping ban was going through the city council. So he called together this commission, and the mayor was there, and they had this big debate about it. And predominantly, the service providers were against it. They thought it was a bad idea. Now, the mayor, in his infinite wisdom, decided to walk out in the middle of the meeting after getting lambasted by the service providers and the commission that he put together, or kept together, and was basically dismissed. They're an advice body that's supposed to be helpful for the city council to make decisions, and the city council not only ignored their advice, but kind of, just did whatever they wanted. And the city council itself is not, they're split on the issue as well. So when the vote went through, it went through 9-4, and so Robin Kinich, Tony Lopez, or what was that guy's name? Yeah, Mr. Lopez and Susan Shepard and Montero?
No.
Ortega. Ortega, yes, thank you, sorry. It's been a while since I had to think about it. They were the ones that decided that it was a horrible idea.
Paul Lopez.
And they still stick, Paul Lopez, they still stick to this idea. And they're very adamant about housing and opening up the community for everybody rather than select individuals.
There was a lot of talk when the ban was first being proposed that it was essentially there to stop Occupy. conversations I had with folks made me think differently. Do you know the history of the bill prior to the Occupy movement?
So the bill being talked about in the circles of the higher business interests and the city's politics kind of came about actually many years ago. From doing my own private detective work or whatever, apparently the city of Austin and the city of Denver have a good relationship together, and the city of Austin came here for consultation and told them about all the great things they're doing to basically get rid of the homeless in their city. And they drafted this whole thing on the sit-lie and how to make a camping ban happen and those things. But that was like back in '94. And it wasn't until they had enough incentive with Occupy from business interests that they were able to actually push it through without major without major problems. Yeah.
So one last question. A lot of folks have been told in this room that the ban will never be repealed. You've kind of known some of the inside information. Do you think that's true, or do you think we can convince some of these council members and or take over city council to repeal this?
While I'm sort of apolitical, it is good to remember that city council is not a permanent seat. They do eventually have to leave, whether they're voted out or whatever it is. So there is hope in that maybe next year we can bring in a group of people that actually understands and emphasizes with the plights going on in the city and walks with the people and talks with the people. But, you know, I don't put very much trust in those sorts of things because any kind of illusionary power like that, I think, corrupts people in the long run, and they will inevitably take the position of business no matter what, just given that they believe that they have the most influence. But that's my own personal opinion. I don't necessarily want to push that on people, but.
You know, if we could convince the legislature to pass a homeless bill of rights, that would the camping ban that would become illegal. If we could get the homeless bill of rights that we want to get.
That is the idea. That's the idea. There are issues when it comes between state and city dynamics, and Denver being a city of home rule, there might be a lot of issues involved with that. But yeah, that's the idea.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
So next, these folks don't really need an introduction because they've been kicking ass in this city for a while now. Therese, if you'd like to talk a little bit about some of the efforts of D-Hole. I kind of forgot to mention in the intro, the first portion of tonight's event will be a lot of review for a lot of kind of history and going back through what's been done recently. And that is specifically so that we kind of can build an understanding about the second part of the conversation, which will be more about tactics. So we really appreciate you guys being here. Therese?
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So I'm really just going to jump off of what Benjamin was just talking about, and with the camping ban, and then with other anti-homeless laws, to talk about what that looks like for a homeless bill of rights, and what is happening around the country in terms of homeless bill of rights, and what we're doing here in Colorado. So, as was previously talked about, there are a lot of laws that are passing in cities all over the U.S. and around the world that specifically criminalize basic acts of survival in public space. So things like sleeping, laying down, sitting in certain areas, urinating in public, sleeping in a car, all of these different things. There's tons and tons of these laws that have been passing, especially since the 80s, to criminalize, to make it a crime to do these basic acts of survival. So in response to this situation, one effort that has been popping up in the past couple of years is homeless bills of rights. So there's 3 states actually that have passed homeless bills of rights thus far, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Illinois. And then the province of Puerto Rico also has, back in the 70s, passed a homeless bill of rights that's a little different. And the bills that have passed so far are really mostly anti-discrimination bills. So they make it so that homeless status, like your housing status, can be included in anti-discrimination cases. So if you're arrested for sleeping outside, you can take that to court and try it on its discrimination basis. And so the Homeless Bill of Rights helps with that. It protects a lot of other rights, the ones that have passed so far, the Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Illinois, in terms of like voting and access to shelters at certain times of the day. There's provisions about non-discrimination in employment and whatnot. So those are exciting pieces of legislation, but I think that we need to go a lot farther. And in California and Oregon, an organization called WRAP, Western Regional Advocacy Project, is going a lot farther. They're saying, no, we don't just want a bill that is anti-discrimination. We want a bill that says, no, you can't have these laws on the books. You can't have local city ordinances that criminalize these basic rights, like sleeping and sitting and laying down and whatnot. So if your city has these laws, then those laws are going to have to be repealed. They're going to have to be taken off the books. They can't be enforced or enacted because this Homeless Bill of Rights that hopefully will soon be passed says, no, you can't do that. So California and Oregon are kind of, I think, the most exciting potentials with that right now. There's other states that are also looking into that. And we hope for that in Colorado. I think, we see this right and left. I mean, in Denver, the research is being done right now on like a comprehensive list of all of the laws that Denver has that are specifically oriented towards criminalizing basic acts of survival in public space. But they include like the things we were talking about, like the unauthorized camping ordinance. Also things like park curfew are affect people a lot because Denver's filled with parks, and so when you're sleeping in a park, that becomes criminal enforcement. Trespassing tickets are given out right and left for the same sorts of things. So that's actually just kind of a side note on the urban camping ban for anybody that maybe is wondering about the status of that. After that law passed, they have not given out any actual urban camping ban tickets. No tickets have been given for the unauthorized camping ban itself. The tickets that are being given are for things like park curfew and trespassing and other ordinances. So after surveying over 500 people about the urban camping ban's effect, what we found was the primary response is people are told to move on. It's basically just get out of here. And then the secondary response would be like that the cops run their name and find that they have some warrant for something else, which may be a previous ticket for trespassing, or maybe a warning, or whatever it is. So then they're arrested for those other things. But no actual urban camping ban tickets. So if that's something that often gets confused. Actually, one other thing on that is that what we have been seeing also, I have quite a number of people, cases that I've collected from people who were given what's called the unlawful camping ticket. And this unlawful camping is different than the camping ban, but then they're taken to court. They go to court for this ticket, and the only law they're actually breaking is the camping ban, but instead of being given a ticket for the camping ban, they're given this ticket for the unlawful camping ordinance, which is specifically a park violation, and it's only for overnight. So anyway, that's the sort of thing that the city is doing in terms of avoiding actually taking this to court, because that would be one of the routes if we wanted to repeal the camping ban through court. We would need a ticket, and since we don't have a ticket, blah, blah, blah. To jump in?
Yeah, I would just like to say it should be noted that it's being used as a stop and frisk, like a homeless stop and frisk. You're using it to approach anybody that looks homeless or whatever they can profile, and then use that to run their name and check their stuff and basically arrest them for any of the innumerable amount of other laws that they can throw at them.
Profiling.
Yes, exactly. It's very targeted. So all that said, getting to what we're doing here in Colorado towards the dreams of a homeless bill of rights for Colorado, information from a large number of people who are or have recently been homeless in Colorado about what rights are being violated. So we have a 25-question survey that asks a bunch of questions about, have you been ticketed or harassed, ticketed, or arrested for sleeping, laying down, peeing in public, park curfew, sleeping in a car, all these different things. And then there's other questions about your access to shelters and about housing and other things like that. So this survey is going to be our foundation. What we find in this survey is going to tell us what's happening on the streets, what's happening in terms of violations of human rights, and then with that we want to say, okay, look at this is what we found. How should this direct our priorities for what needs to be in a homeless bill of rights for Colorado? And that process is going to take time, and it takes a lot of people that are willing to go out on the streets and in the various feeds or shelters or communities, other places where we can connect with people that are currently or have been homeless, that will answer these questions and guide our process, give this information so we know what's really happening. So all of that said, if people are interested in being surveyors and getting involved in that side of things, to go out and gather this information, that would be awesome. I'll pass around this. This is our like a little sign-up sheet. You can put your email down if you wanna get contact information about this. And then there's flyers too about the Homeless Bill of Rights. Let me think if there was anything else important I was missing. I guess just one thing that the WRAP, the Western Regional Advocacy Project, I think does a really good job of tying these anti-homeless laws into the bigger picture of history. And as a part of that, we see how these laws are really a extension, a continuation of so many other laws of our past that specifically targeted groups of people, be they people of color, be they immigrants, be they whatnot, and said, no, we don't want you in here, push you out of this public space. Like, we're going to find some sort of law to push you out of public space. So like Jim Crow laws and anti-Oakley laws and ugly laws, all of these things were specifically laws that enabled cities to push people they didn't like out of public space. And I think that's what's happening now. It's a continuation of that with all of these laws we see. And it's a combination between, the enactment of these laws and then, of course, the police enforcement of them, which leads to all sorts of complicated issues and people being cycled through jails and whatnot. So, yeah, I'm gonna close with that, but open for questions or thoughts or additions and whatnot. Chris?
My question is about your specific plans, if you have any yet, about pushing the homeless bill of rights. Namely, is it necessarily a state issue? Could it be done on a city level? Are you thinking initiative? Are you thinking bill? Have you even talked about that yet?
Yeah, we've definitely talked about it. I think nothing's set in stone until something's set in stone, and so I'm not going to say what's going to happen. What we want is legislation that's going to stop these anti-homeless laws from being able to be enacted or enforced in cities all around Colorado. So I think the strategies of what's going to get there, we still don't know, and I think everybody's got to start engaging in this process and start debating, and so we can figure that out. But we really are looking towards statewide legislation that would be a real bill. Other things could happen in the meanwhile. We could end up changing paths and say, no, like this state thing's really not to work. We have to go city by city based on the whole relationship between the city and the state and the fact that there are home rule cities and all that. But that's kind of unknown at the moment. Did you want to?
No, you covered it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's already a camping violation ordinance on the books before the camping was banned. Can you indulge on the differences or history of that one, or maybe the numbers of citations prior to the camping ban?
Are you talking about the unlawful camping ordinance? That's a park violation. So it's
King, famously said that if you have a moral duty to disobey unjust laws. And he went further to define unjust laws as any law that is not enforced equally. In other words, a law that bans all camping or the urban camping ban, since it isn't just specifically targeted or specifically in the wording toward one person, since it means that no citizen in Denver is technically allowed to quote-unquote urban camp. Under Dr. King's definition, and that wouldn't be an unjust law. I'm wondering whether you think it is, because I see the camping ban as essentially outlawing something that no one, unless they have a need to do something, would end up doing the things that are mandated. So do you consider the urban camping ban an unjust law, or do you think it's a just law that's just bad policy?
Most definitely, I consider it to be an unjust law. I don't know if somebody else wants to jump in with an answer to that. Somebody else that might have a...
I guess the reason I ask is because it sounds like the folks who want to make sure that we aren't just doing anti-discrimination laws. So in other words, the path that would, for the Homeless Bill of Rights, that would essentially stop at anti-discrimination laws is essentially stating what King was stating, is that as long as it's
uniform approach is that so if you're saying everybody has the equal right to sleep under a bridge, sure, that's great, that's great, but you're not saying everybody has the equal right to sleep in a house. And so you're stuck in this sort of catch-22 where if you have nowhere else to go, if you don't have a house or wherever to sleep, then the law is not equally targeted towards you. It's stated as being that it's anti-discrimination, but it's actually not equally targeted. It's your life conditions make it such that it's going to target you and not other people. So it's not actually equal because you're forced to do something that other people have an option of not doing.
I'd say it's targeting a certain group of people, and that's a certain group of people that don't have enough money in their pocket to buy a place to stay overnight. Because in our society right now, if you don't have money, you don't exist as far as everybody else is concerned. No politician is going to consider you a constituent. No businessman is going to look at you. There's a class of people that incorporates everybody, all races, all creeds. You don't have enough money in your pocket. You are in a class of people that they call the homeless or the destitute. And it doesn't matter what color your skin is or what your religion is or anything else. It's about the amount of money in your pocket.
So, in other words, if somebody reads the urban camping ban and sees it as a non-discrimination law, it's because they don't understand what causes homelessness and why individuals are forced to do certain things. Make sense?
So it's actually a fairly enforced law. So it's a just law. So if Mayor Hancock or Tammy Doerr want to take their sleeping bag and push their shopping cart onto the mall or the river, and they do that, they'll be told to move along. So therefore, it's a fair law. And of course, I'm being facetious. So I think you answered it yourself, Steve. It's targeting acts of survival, and Tammy and Hancock don't need to sleep under the bridge or on the mall because they have houses, secure houses. So it's not really a neutral on its face applied discriminatorily. It's an unjust law because it criminalizes acts of survival. Is that the way other people see it?
Yeah, I think it's important that, I've seen that argument thrown out, I think it's important that we point the differences out between the law on paper and the law in reality.
Would an economic bill of rights provide protections that you're looking for, I mean, instead of naming it specifically for a homeless bill of rights, would economic bill of rights serve, protect everybody?
Well, I mean, that serves one thing, but part of a major focus of a lot of the homeless bill of rights protections are against what's happening in public space in terms of criminalization of people doing things in public space. So the economic side of that in terms of people's rights to housing or rights to employment or rights to various economic necessities, I mean, yeah, for sure, like that's like a must, like let's talk about that too. But we also are in this immediate situation where people are being harassed for existing in public space, and so we kind of have to address those both. And that, so as, you know, like is in terms of our talk in terms of homeless bill of rights legislation, we've really been focusing on that public space side of it for the moment. Not to say that the other couldn't be a part of it, but yeah.
Thanks, Teresa. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And everybody should be a surveyor, especially these older people.
Yeah, please, everybody sign up, see what you can do to be a surveyor. All right, is Colleen here?
Yeah.
All right. So we kind of announced this event last minute, about 2 weeks ago. And the activist community in Denver is a really tight, amazing community. But of all the really amazing things I've seen the activist community do, I don't know that I've seen this one before. There was another event scheduled for tonight. Some folks working on against mass incarceration have been doing some wonderful things, and they had a play scheduled for tonight. And in an incredible act of solidarity, they actually postponed their event in order to not conflict with this event, because they felt that this issue was important and that we should be discussing it. So we're going to ask Colleen to come up and talk a little bit about mass incarceration, some of the efforts that they're doing, and how it relates to what we're doing.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
So yeah, thanks everyone for coming here. I first want to acknowledge everyone who's in this room because it's such important work and such a relevant issue for Denver right now, right? I mean, we've all seen the development and the continuous pushing out of people from the city center. Well, what was mentioned earlier was that I am a part of this production with Benjamin Turk. He wrote a play called Behind the Badge. And if you're interested in finding out when we've postponed our play until, you can go to insurgenttheater.org. Insurgenttheater.org. The play is called Behind the Badge. We have not yet established a date, but we do know that it will be in July. And it will be held at the Savoy Theater, which is right where, like, it's on Curtis, right? Folks know? Okay, well, anyways, it's in lower 5 Points, right where 5 Points meets downtown. Anyways, we're going to reschedule that. But I guess, am I also to talk about the intersection of homelessness and incarceration a bit? Okay, cool. So obviously, I mean, Benjamin and Therese did such a great job of touching on some points, and so I might overlap with what they said, but obviously, you know, the criminalization of poverty is something that is happening in Denver right now and that there is amazing resistance against. I would also add to that criminalization of queerness happens a lot. Criminalization of sex workers happens just as frequently. The criminalization of race, of being a dangerous other, you know, of being a deviant in some way. This mass incarceration rests on the social control of people that are deemed to be undesirable, right? And most frequently, they are also poor. And so we know in the criminal justice system that 98% of convictions go through without a trial. So 98% of people are plea bargaining. And why do we think that is? Why might people plea bargain instead of take it to a jury?
Because they can't bail out.
They're not encouraged to. They feel disempowered. They don't believe in the justice system. They feel like maybe they already have a record, that they can't, really fight against anything. They're in jail already. So yeah, like Benjamin said, they don't have the resources to get adequate counsel, right? So there's all of these things where incarceration, the criminal justice system, or the prison system, right? Because it's designed to control and warehouse people, and it's doing a good job at that. It actually is a successful program if you think of it like that. It is, right now locking up 2.3 million people, 2.3 million people, and that's a lot. And nearly all of them are also poor. And the way that this relates to homelessness is that we know about post-incarceration sanctions, right? So when folks get out of jail or when they get out of prison, what do you think their life chances are? Pretty nil. And we know that there are a host of civil sanctions against them. Thank you, President Bill Clinton. Not only were your saxophone skills great, but your method of further penalizing people who have already paid their time has really been successful, because he has passed things like, if you have a drug felony, you cannot live in Section 8 housing. The federal government will not pay for you to live or really assist you when you have that sort of thing on your record. There are also, welfare can be cut off depending upon what state you are in. Depending upon what state you're in, you might not be able to vote. In Colorado, if you are on parole, even though you're out of prison, you cannot vote. And so this sort of locks people into a cycle, right? And so especially for those who are both homeless and have experience with the criminal justice system, oftentimes it's an in and out, in and out, in and out. And, the resources just aren't there for folks to get back on their feet. And the folks who do get back on their feet are amazingly resilient. I have stories. I'm sure there are people here who have stories of being able to get through this. So I want to plug an organization that is helping people get through this. It's a coalition, and it's called Communities United Against Mass Incarceration. That's long-winded. I'm sorry. If you want to Google it, you can look up Colorado mass incarceration, and it'll pop up. This is a coalition of different people and of different organizations who are working to fight against immigration detention, who are fighting against mass incarceration, who are helping to imagine different infrastructures for people who are getting out of prison and jail and who need that support and who need communities. And so their next meeting is Saturday, June 7th. And it's at the CPC, so the Colorado Progressive Coalition. I think most folks know where that is, but just for those who don't, it's 1029 Santa Fe. So again, that's Saturday, June 7th at CPC, 1029 Santa Fe. It's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And even if you're not coming representing an organization, please come out and have your voice heard. It's still in the beginning stages. And we need people to help formulate this. We especially need people who have these experiences themselves, who have been homeless, who have been incarcerated, to help really shape the narrative and the way that this coalition moves forward. I'm going to plug one more thing. So, I'm sorry. I work with the Elephant Circle. Has anyone heard of the Elephant Circle in here? It's a fairly new, my friends have heard of it. It's a fairly new organization, and primarily it works around birthing justice rights and providing, alternative birthing procedures, doula, midwifery, to people who can't normally access them. But additionally, there is a program that I help lead that takes a class into the Denver Women's Correctional Facility for women who are survivors of intimate partner violence. So we know if you look at any women's prison, you're going to find about 70 to 80% of those women have been abused in their lives. No surprise, but it's still a high statistic, and sometimes it's even more than that. It's like 90%. We're talking sexual molestation, we're talking physical abuse, emotional abuse, structural violence, and this is exactly what the Elephant Circle does in our class. We talk about how systems are violent and how people, react to that. And so we need help with that because some of the women, even though they're long-term, so I'm working with women who are in there for 20, who are in there for life, but some of them, thankfully, are up for parole. And that's really exciting, except because I volunteer in the prison, I can't work with them. There's rules against that, which doesn't really make sense, I know. If you want to call the prison administration, you can, please. But we need people to be there as support systems for these women who have only known a cage for the last 20 years, 30 years, whatever. And so if you want more information, look up the Elephant Circle, email who's ever on there, or talk to me. I'm in the back. So thank you. Yes.
Could you express real quickly the name Elephant Circle?
Oh, yeah. So the Elephant Circle, the reason why it's named that is because when a mother elephant is giving birth, the herd of remaining elephants forms a circle around that birthing mother to form as protection against predators, which is pretty powerful. And that's exactly what this organization is about. How can we protect each other, support each other, and keep our communities resilient?
We've got time. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Just one. If property is fully under control, what makes rich people control?
Oh, how can we control the rich?
You probably remember, hearing women's history off our backs, off our bodies. How can we do that?
Right. How can we ward off the violence and domination from rich groups, basically, is what you're asking? I mean, again...
Yeah, get your laws off our bodies, because we're not away from this. And I think it applies just as much to this situation, into that aspect of human.
Right, that's a great question. I mean, some people take the reform route. I am someone who is far more interested in working with people, building relationships, and protecting each other, right? Having each other's backs against a really, really hectic, chaotic, violent, tumultuous world. And so, for me, it's just, constant vigilance, right? Like checking up with people, like, oh, I haven't heard from my friend in a long time, I'm going to call them. Or constantly going to community rallies like this and different organizations, keeping myself plugged in so that, when shit goes down, or if it does, I have people there. And there's this amazing, I'm now going off on a tangent, but in Chile, they outlawed abortion. I don't know if you've heard of this. Outlawed abortion, and there are about 160,000 abortions every year. So it's not like they're not happening. And what happened is there is a group that arose that started ordering those pills. I forgot what the name of them, but that kind of...
Morning after?
Plan B.
Plan B, yeah, and then another type of pill too. What?
Are you for it? What is it, 486?
Yeah, the 486, yeah. So they started ordering those offline, going around to different communities, and not just their activist circles, but actually going out into, impoverished communities and all these places and talking to women, asking what they needed, and to see how they could provide abortion services since the state had criminalized it. And so that's one example that is far away, but that is something we can think of in doing here, and what D-Hole is doing, and what Kwame is doing, Communities United Against Mass Incarceration. Yes?
I have a question in regard to, a lot of people are fighting the system. Is there circle that you're working, I'm not talking about elephant circle, I'm talking about mass incarceration. People are actually looking at how to remove the system that is attached to the mass incarceration. For example, what is that town we have a prison in? I forgot. Not Pueblo.
Canyon City.
Canyon City. You know, the whole city is living off of those prisons. You just, you know, the guard. It's not just the guards, not the police. You know, there is a huge lot of people living off of that economically. How we can dismantle that and redirect that, you know, so they can make a living in other ways than, you know, wasting a human life behind bars.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, this is one thing, you know, very entrenched. It's not just work with the police, work with the legislators. You know, you're talking about, you know, cutting off somebody's economical means, you know, and how we can redirect that to do other things. So that city economics is not depending on having prison in their community. And you're hearing this from somebody who has worked in prison and juvenile detention centers. A lot of people are making bread and butter out of this.
I think that is, first off, the best thing I've heard all day, and so relevant, and something that really needs a lot of dialogue in our communities about, because working class people are working in these prisons and jails. It's not the rich who are coming in and, you know, caging folks, right? And so it's not as easy as disinvesting in prisons and jails, but rather a reinvestment in our communities, you know, a reimagination of how our local economies can grow without locking people up, right? And so in terms of, you know, fighting the system, I think at this organization I referenced, we're also talking about more constructive, positive, like, infrastructures, and so,
I do want to say that while it is blue-collar people doing these jobs, we do have the Corrections Corporation of America, I think it is, who's making money. And when we had the laws against being able to stop people for being the color brown in Arizona, what was that, SB 171, that was introduced by ALEC, by the Corrections Corporation of America, to fill their jails. So it is big business. Even though, there's a bunch of people, blue-collar workers, making money off of it, there is a very small number of people making money off of misery.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so I think a lot of our analysis does center on the governments and the corporations that profit off of these systems, but also culturally, right? Like, I feel as though, I don't know if people agree with me, but I feel as though we live in a culture of fear that is based on reacting to that fear with punitive measures and with punishment and with just like get them away from us, right? Instead of this more transformative approach where we can actually, you know, change the conditions culturally and institutionally that keep folks in cages, both literally and metaphorically.
Actually, I have a comment about the prison thing and how much it costs. In San Francisco, I was there for 30 years, and right before I left in 2011, there was a study done, and they claimed that anyone who was chronically homeless was costing the city $65,000 a year, right? So I dug into it and wrote an article for The Guardian and the papers, and basically figured out that the police department, the paramedics, the ERs, all the people that were bitching about homeless people were actually the ones profiting off of them, which is basically poverty pimping. And we put it into the papers, and the movie director, Francis Coppola, had a organization in North Beach that he had formed called North Beach Citizens, and his principle was that everyone in the community was a citizen. If they became homeless, something had happened to them. It was our job to find that out and help them, so we would do these fundraising dinners. His organization would get people off the streets in 2 months, basically by giving them what they needed, which was housing first, and then whatever they needed to get out of their addictions, find work. Success rate, 60 people every 2 months were off the streets working and happy and volunteering for them. So this whole there is a whole industry, and it's in Boulder. I mean, the shelter, all these people have jobs, and their jobs are keeping pretty much people that are out in the streets in misery so that they continue to have jobs. And I think that that's, you know, an angle you can take. What's it costing the city, like these social misbehavior ordinances, keep arresting people for nothing, throwing them in jail. You know, people are charged for their jail time. And so they come out, they have to find work right away. If they can't pay the fines or whatever, they're back in jail. This is like continuous, as you know, the criminalization of poor people. And, you know, back in the 80s, I remember being with groups that were talking about the fact that they were going to start criminalizing poor people, and we were like, well, how are they going to do that? And then the trend to privatize prisons came along, and the same day that they arrested, like, the 6 kids up in Boulder for mushrooms and marijuana they were supposedly selling to Boulder High kids, they had an article right next to it that said, we're going to start a new jail that's going to be for lesser offenders, like smaller offenses. So the whole thing was like, well, now that we have all these social, you know, misbehavior laws, we need a place for these people to go. They're not talking about building housing, they're talking about building more jails.
Yeah.
And so this is, what you said at first, your name's Steve, it's so true. This is all punishment for people. You know, I'm working hard, you know, you're out there, you don't have to do anything. And it's incredible, even in the homeless community, there's those kind of attitudes. And that's really what it's about. It's like who's above whoever. It's class warfare. And nobody's addressing that. It's you know, in Boulder it's really obvious because there's poor and there is rich. And supposedly the rich are liberal. So it's really hard to understand what's going on there, because I've been seeing people just, you know, abused, beaten, tasered. People are getting woken up at 4 in the morning with tasers. Some guy in front of the library repeatedly tasered like 18 times in handcuffs. And we just had a Know Your Rights thing with Food Not Bombs and what's the other group? But anyway, you know, 3 hours later they were in front of the library tasering this guy over and over and over. And it's getting, I've never seen anything like it. I've been telling people it's like having, it's like watching a bad movie in Nazi Germany in the 30s, you know, when they were building up and killing gypsies. I mean, that's what I feel like I'm seeing. There's like flower kids that are coming through going to the rainbow gathering that are being ID'd 6 times in a week. I mean, just going through their backpacks, people being beaten down, people, I've never seen, a 54-year-old friend of mine dragged by her neck, picked up off the ground, and taken across the street and thrown on the ground by an RTD supervisor because she didn't have money to get on a bus. Gina, yeah.
Yeah. And to her point, Gina is talking about, you know, a lesser crime, you know, taking the least amount of a sentence she can, which when I attended that, I thought, why are we even talking about that? These people should be going to jail who did this to her.
Thanks so much, Steve.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, bills are full of the wrong people.
They are. I mean, and I think, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Rob? Sam?
Oh, my name's Gail.
Yeah. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Kelsey. I think Gail really brings up some important points that I think in the long term maybe these forums can start discussing. Is first, I do think the rich are controlled. They're just not controlled by us. They're controlled the same way the middle class is controlled, through fear, ignorance, and bigotry. And those are the tools that are then used for the power elite to control the masses. And they do it by making us hate and want to punish poor people, and hate and want to punish people that don't meet our standards in society. So in the long term, I would love for us to move on to sort of one of those esoteric arguments and figure out how we can start addressing those in society. But right off the bat, I think that's a great segue. There's been a lot of push in Boulder to criminalize acts of survival, and we've got some folks that have come up from Boulder to speak specifically on this. Rob Smoke is going to be coming up and speaking, and then we also have, believe it or not, we have a Boulder City Council member here, Sam Weaver, who definitely deserves a round of applause for having the gonads to walk into a room full of activists working on the homeless issue.
Witness what happened in Boulder that
Exactly.
night.
So we had Councilman Brooks tell us he was going to attend tonight.
Where is he?
But apparently he got in an accident or tripped on the curb on the way because he's not here. So
I really appreciate you showing up, Rob.
So first, sorry, Sam. Rob's going to speak, and then Sam will spend a few minutes talking about his experience in the council recently.
So my name is Rob Smoke. That's my real name. Tell people about that.
Really try to project, Rob. If
Yeah.
you can.
Okay. I am homeless. I've been homeless a little less than a year and a half, and I was homeless a little bit before that. I also lived at the same address in Boulder for 20 years in an apartment that I rented, which when I started renting it was $400 a month, and now I think it's around $1,100. So, you know, out of my league. And I was really glad to hear the term structural violence used before, because I think that's sort of the common thread. If you look at drug laws or, laws that are used against people, and, the police state has just, magnified itself and become sort of the, the integral aspect of all our lives. I mean, people are either, you're either on the good side of the law pretending that there's no problem, or you're in trouble. You're on the verge of going to prison for something. It could be jaywalking, but something. It could be trying to get on a bus without the fare. It could be smoking a joint in public. Any of those things. And I'm not sure what the answer is in terms of, coming out of victimhood, but there has to be some movement that involves our hearts and our souls and our minds that raises our consciousness, that raises the consciousness of people who weren't ready to have it raised, but somehow are able to come around if there's enough voice, if there's enough expression of that consciousness. I attended with Darren and maybe some other people in the audience here, a city council meeting maybe about 2 months ago where these criminalization laws came up, and I think 10 people spoke out against, and all 9 people on council, apologetically some of them, voted for criminalization. And the only proponents there were the city attorney, who's a hired dude from Seattle, who had a terrible failed record in Seattle. His name's Tom Carr. And so, you talk about people being controlled, but on that day, it was clear that the minds of the city council there were controlled by all the people in town who are saying, get rid of these homeless people, these damn homeless people. Well, there might be 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, I don't know what the numbers are, of people who panhandle on the street aggressively or act drunk on the street or get drunk and are outdoors all day and act obnoxious. That's not homeless people. The homeless, I was looking on a site today called Squidoo. It's a good one to look up. And there's a whole bunch of articles about homelessness and issues relating to it. And one of the editorials that's on there is from a person who was homeless who says they hate that term, the homeless, because it's not a profession. Like, you don't say the dentist or the hooker or whatever. But somehow there is this group of people that are the homeless. And I'm a person who hit rough times financially and with my health and so forth, and I wasn't particularly, one aspect of my life, I wasn't particularly afraid of becoming homeless. I mean, I did have some worries and anxiety and so forth, but I mean, for me, my life as a homeless person hasn't been that bad. I've stayed in hotels some, and I've lived in the woods some, and last year when the flood hit Boulder, I was camping in Indian Peaks. And so what did I do? I went to Black Hawk and got a room in the Ameristar, and during the worst part of the rain, I was swimming in the pool on the roof. So, I'm not like a typical homeless person, but I also I served 5 years on the City of Boulder's Human Relations Commission, and they have dealt somewhat with policy in the past. Now they're not. Now it's a council that's just taking control, and the city attorney is taking control, and the city manager is taking control. And, you know, their ideas are to use law enforcement, just put all the weight on law enforcement to solve a problem that's never been solved by law enforcement. Homelessness, I mean, social problems generally. When have the police solved a social problem? It's a ridiculous proposition. And I'm sorry to just be going on here. I wanted to talk briefly about a couple of things that I just see as possibilities. They're not really happening now, but I grew up in the 60s in New York City. And at that time, there were people in the state legislature who were some were Republicans and Democrats, and they had co-signed legislation that made housing available through bonding. You know, there was some $1 billion amount involved, and nonprofit housing associations were able to get together and build apartments. And actually, people who moved into them had some ownership rights in those apartments. And I grew up in one of those apartments. And there were tens of thousands of those built in New York City. There was also a lot of public housing because these politicians who were dense and as dumb and stupid as they are now, they said to each other, well, do we want it to be like Calcutta? Do we want just people coming here and living in the streets? And at some point, people said, well, you had people coming from all over, from other nations, from Puerto Rico, from, you know, across the USA, from the South. They said, we just can't have these people just living. So there was some attempt at public housing. Some of it, you know, didn't work out that well. But in essence, it was people of, you know, probably the same political persuasions that we have now, but a little bit different. It was like, as a practical solution, do you want to create housing? Do you want to have people housed somehow or other and put that as a priority? Or do you want to have people just living in the streets and, taking over abandoned buildings and have that be sort of the, have New York be, the East Coast Calcutta? And people said no to that, and they did housing. So to me, it seems like, and, I have to add one thing to this. The former sheriff of Boulder County, his name was Georgette, he sent an op-ed piece into the Daily Camera, the newspaper, last year, saying it's fucking ridiculous, excuse my language, to put people in jail and shuttle them back and forth from, Boulder to the jail for these crimes like getting drunk in public or walking around drunk or anything like that. And it's a terrible just waste of resources. So, I don't in particular have any answers today, but what I know is that it has to be possible. It's going on in other states where people are doing housing first and talking about housing first, and there's no particular reason other than people's stupidity and ignorance and everything that we're witness to preventing Colorado from making housing, subsistence housing, if you want to call it that. And certainly bureaucrats are going to call it that. There's nothing really standing in the way of that other than people's will, other than people's consciousness, other than people's desire to see it happen. So, personally, I'd like to see that. And some of the stuff that went on in New York City was actually really, really good. I lived for a time in a sort of an artist cooperative where a group of artists got together and renovated a tenement building that would have been slated for destruction. And they did it through the city. They were able to, work out the financing and so forth with the bureaucrats, with the city of Boulder. Not the city of Boulder, the city of New York. And there's nothing that stops cities or the state from participating in that stuff. So, I don't know. Just something else to throw out.
Okay, on that point, I would like to note, state legislature did just pass a $20 million housing trust, was taken from the foreclosure settlement, which kind of sucks, but it is a housing trust, so cool.
For the people that kicked out of their home.
For the people that get out of their homes. It wouldn't be a bad idea to start a serious effort to make sure that housing money goes to people who need it, not for first-time home buyer loans. Stuff like that. So,
Just to add one more thing, I've been working with a group in Boulder, and we applied for an FCC license for an FM station, and we won the competition for it in Boulder. And to me, issues like this are the essential thing that you have to talk about. It has to be like day to day. You know, I mean, the commercial media is full of, you know, Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, and what have you. So, you know, the homeless people have to be willing to twerk on the radio. You know, the homeless people have to be willing to be in the face of people who are just questioning, what is that? Why should I, you know, why should I want to help? Why should I step, you know, 1 foot out of my comfortable little world to assist in some way? So I think that's something we'd like to do. We're not on the air yet, but hopefully we will be, you know, maybe by September, end of August, something like that. So if people are interested in doing media, new media, talk to me.
cool. Rob, are you connected with D-Hole? D-Hole's published a newspaper. Plug the newspaper real quick. Sounds like that might be something that you guys could coordinate and maybe do some radio stuff too. What's the newspaper name?
Here's the newspaper. It's called Get Loud. We can pass it around. We only had enough money to print 1,000 copies. So our goal now is to quadruple that and eventually have 10 times as many, because right now we have to be really stingy. This came out about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and we tried to get it primarily to people experiencing homelessness. It's the publication, unlike the competitor, that's by, for, and about people experiencing homelessness. So, but we want to print many, many more copies so that we can get it to the house community, as one of our members says, the insiders. Because when people experiencing homelessness write about their experiences, they're expecting people in houses to be reading it. So that's our goal. And at some point, if you put your name on Teresa's list, we'll probably send you something and update you about Get Loud and maybe, you know, help us raise money for it. So, yeah.
So when you guys connect, for sure.
We'd love to work with you.
Can you find it online at the D-Hole website?
Hi, Nick. Yes. Yes. You go to D-Hole website, and you'll see a Get Loud, and it'll connect you to Get Loud, and we also have a Get Loud website. But yes, absolutely.
That's at denverhomelessoutloud.org.
Should we just pass? Would we get? Should we pass this around?
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it.
There you go. You good? We only have one copy.
Big thanks to Rob.
How do we get the radio station? How do we listen to the radio station?
Well, we're not up yet. We don't even have a website up right now, but you can get in touch with me or just see me.
Yeah, definitely send it to Occupy, and all of our groups will help promote and push that.
But I think the media is just so critical. I mean, thank goodness for like radio stations and KGNU, but mainstream media forget it. I wanted to ask you, you know, Rob, why do you think mainstream Denver sees people dragging their stuff around and their shopping carts and just looking ragged and not being, and why does mainstream Denver ignore it? I can't understand it, but one possibility is the way the media frames the whole situation. For example, when Denver Homeless Out Loud, we did our survey and printed that wonderful report. Basically, the media just took up the partnership's mantra that totally discrediting it, that those people didn't know what they were talking about. And we find that over and over. Yes.
Yeah, they said that even though the head of the Denver University Political Science Department did the analysis and helped put together the survey. So, yeah, their credibility is really under question.
They consistently take the position of the city council and the partnership. So we need to create our own media, and we need to just insist that they change their perspective, because that, I think, is what is causing these misperceptions in most people's mind. They see something that's horrendous. It's Calcutta. And what are I think instantly they think, oh, this is terrible. And the next moment they say, oh, it's the fault of those people. It's the fault of those individuals. They're lazy, they're drunk, they don't, and so they don't care.
Well, definitely everybody tell your friends about and push, get loud, and as soon as the radio station comes up, let us know. We'll all push it in our groups and see if we can get some folks. So Councilman Weaver, if you wouldn't mind, come on up, let us know what Boulder's doing. And then also, I'd like to spend a few minutes, bring Darren up in a few minutes and just have him tell you who to contact to work in some of the activism against criminalization of homeless folks in Boulder. Thanks.
You bet. So, thanks for giving me a little time to talk tonight. I come to Boulder City Council. I've been on about 6 months now, and I come out of a world of activism and a different topic. So I've spent a lot of time in rooms with people talking about how to get clean energy policy passed, and this is not one that I'm as familiar with. So I'm here largely to learn tonight. I've spent a lot of time talking with Lisa Morzell. She's my colleague on the Boulder City Council. She spent a little over a year of her early adulthood homeless, and so we've talked a little bit about that, and she was very encouraging for me to come down here and get some feedback from you all. I've seen some of you testify before us at our council hearings that we had. I think we missed you that night because I think that was the night that you got in trouble, so I'm sorry for your experience. But I do want to acknowledge the passion that you've all got for it. I have sat in rooms with passionate people, and I know that it really kind of keeps us all focused on the stuff we need to be as elected officials. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, when I was running for office, this was one of the most complicated single subjects that I had to think about, because there's layers and layers and layers that affect it, right? There's the whole economic condition of our country that leads to more people being in poverty. Then there's the state issue to the layer. Then there's the fact that counties are responsible for most of the social services in Colorado. And then there was me getting familiar with what the institutions in Boulder are that touch the lives of people without shelter. So I just thought I'd go over some of those and tell you what we've been doing as policy initiatives on the other side before I come back and take some abuse on what we've done as far as some of our recent laws. So I want to highlight one thing, because Rob was on the Human Rights Commission, and one thing that we did in Boulder last November was we passed a measure called 2H. This was a referendum referred by the City Council that allowed us to appoint people who are not legal electors in Boulder to our boards and commissions. And so what that meant to us was we wanted to daylight some people who otherwise are kind of in the shadows in Boulder. And we were able to appoint, because this passed with flying colors, like I don't remember 65-35 or 70-30, we appointed as counsel Jose Bateta, who is an undocumented person who works in our community, to be on the Human Rights Commission. And so as far as we know, that was one of the first times that a city municipality has appointed a non-elector. The reason I bring that up is we have a motivation to want to daylight some things that are not as well understood in the community. And so another thing that we've got going in Boulder is an affordable housing program. It's not as good as the New York City housing program, but we have a target of 10% permanently affordable housing in the city. Some of that comes through our housing authority. Others of it is deed-restricted housing that's built by private home builders as part of what goes on. So we're at about 7.5% now, affordable housing, which is defined as under, I forget, 50% of AMI, so it's accessible to people who are making under 50% of the annual median income in Boulder. That is a stepping stone, I see, for people who are transitioning out of homelessness, who have been reintegrated into a working role in society. On the other end of that, we have the Boulder Emergency Shelter for the Homeless. I'm sure that's a service that's replicated here in Denver. There's about 90 beds there for men. I think there's another set aside for women that's 30 or 40. and you could probably help me with this, Gaia, to get the numbers right. And they also have a transition program for people who are clean and sober. There is a transition program where they can stay there every night, regardless of whether they've got there's a limit on how many nights you can stay. Then there's the Boulder Overflow, which takes additional, if those beds are full, that shelter only runs in the winter months. So on our to-do list is to really figure out what we can do to boost shelter in the summer months. We just had someone die unsheltered outside in Boulder right after the shelter stopped taking people and after Boho stopped taking people. So we do have a Housing First program currently in Boulder that has about 25 people. You're all probably more familiar than I am with the qualifications for that. But there are 25 spots where, regardless of your situation, whether it's mental disability, substance abuse, or whatever, there's currently 25 spots where you can get into a Housing First slot with a caseworker that's just going to work on managing your situation. And we're building another 35 permanent, dedicated Housing First units. So this isn't enough, but this is kind of the steps that we're trying to take as doing our parts. Then we have a group that George Epp, among others, is on. He's the former Boulder County Sheriff. It's called Bridge House. And Bridge House is run by Isabel McDevitt. She comes to us out of New York City. And the goal for Bridge House is it's a day shelter, so there's food, and locations for people to come who need lunch. And they transition those folks into work situations if they're willing to do that and they're capable of doing it. And that organization is now fundraising to put another 30 dorm rooms in South Boulder so that people who are in the Ready to Work program aren't sleeping out and then trying to come into a work situation. So there's fundraising going on in the city right now to provide that. So that brings us to what we've done, but where are we still falling short in what we provide as a city? One thing is day shelter. So right now the library is pretty much a de facto day shelter, and that's caused a lot of conflict in the community. There's a goal and discussions going on where and how can we have a day shelter where people can not only shelter during the day but store their goods so that they're not constantly worrying about being victimized or losing their goods. And so those are kind of the things that we're talking about, at least me and a few other council members, about where to go next with the provision of services. And so I'll stop there, and I'll take your feedback and your questions because I'm interested in hearing what you got to say.
Actually, I feel like I should maybe step in on Sam's behalf here real quick because I feel I had to cut him off. We actually had not had Sam scheduled as a speaker, and there is another group in the room that folks might want to beat up on tonight. So I'm hoping that perhaps we can set up a forum where you would have an opportunity to spend more time and kind of discuss some of the many things that I'd like to talk to you about and some other folks. Do you all mind if we move on with the program since it wasn't necessarily part of tonight's? I know it's hard to have a council member in your sights. Okay, 5 minutes. I'm going to be really strict on 5 minutes. Thanks.
Sure. It's your time, not mine. So.
Well, how much money does Boulder as a city dedicate towards services versus how much is dependent on the nonprofit sector without public funding?
So I believe, and don't quote me on this because I have not done my homework on this, but from my last recollection of our briefing, we put in about $750,000, and we do it in a way that levers as much as we can. So it levers both, additional government money, county money, and nonprofits. As far as the total nonprofit budget, I think the shelter for the homeless is a couple million a year. I just met with Greg Harm, so it might be 2 or 2.5. I think the Bridge House is running around $1 million a year right now. Boho, I'm not sure, but it's going to be a small fraction of that. I think that will probably be in a few $100,000. So we're probably putting in something in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% of what's going towards homeless services. So does that answer your question?
Sure. So so you're talking about increasing services. Is the responsibility left on the private market? is the responsibility in increasing services left to the churches and to the nonprofit sector?
Some of each. So the discussion about what the city contributes is an ongoing discussion that happens every year when we decide during the budget process how much are we going to set aside for
So what's committed?
Nothing's committed right now. We don't have the budget cycle is just getting started for this year.
We'll take 3 quick questions. I hate to be this way, but if we can do Irene, Benjamin, and Reno. Sorry, guys. We're really limited.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm really interested in knowing why you voted for the social misbehavior ordinance. I just think that a unanimous vote sent a message to the community that Boulder was in support of this, yet in my world, nobody supported it, and so I was out of town, and so I wasn't at the meeting, and I was just very surprised to hear that happened.
Well, I guess from my perspective, there's 2 sides to what the challenges we face are. I don't view the homeless as a homogeneous community, okay? I think that there's a lot of different populations within people who don't have shelter, and so some of those populations do mistreat other people. They mistreat other homeless, and they mistreat people who are not homeless. I can give you a quick example. There's a guy who runs Southmouth Wings, small kind of struggling business that's near where there's a lot of congregation of people, some of whom are homeless. And there's a couple people who I think have mental issues who go in there every day and cause him problems. And he's been assaulted, he's been spat on, he's had all kinds of challenges that include physical assault of that business owner who's simply trying to run a business. And so what the measures that we just passed were focused on are repeat offenders. So the thing that we were enabling was jail time for people who are repeat offenders, but not necessarily of the particular ordinance that they were picked up for on that court case or that day. So it was an attempt to give the judge more leeway, and we have a really interesting municipal judge in Boulder. It was an attempt to give her more leeway to take the potentially most violent criminals who appear before her, whether homeless or not, on municipal ordinance violation and give them jail time if she thinks it's warranted.
And so you're saying personally that was your impetus for your vote?
That's correct.
One complaint. Was it one complaint?
Was there what now?
Was it one complaint? Is that what you're saying? I'm just trying to be clear. Was it one complaint?
The intention is for people who have prior offenses to be able to be jailed. So if you got a prior...
No, I understood that. But your impetus was hearing the testimony of...
No, there's many other complaints that I've received. I gave you one that is perhaps it was the most compelling to me of somebody who is struggling in their life as well, who's not homeless, but who is interacting with some of the more badly behaving.
All right, I'm going to attempt to be like a hardcore facilitator. 2 questions, literally. Let's do like 30-second ask, 30-second answer.
Okay, I can do the speed dial.
So the National Interagency Council on Homelessness, it's a national body that was formed, as well as several other state agencies that are predominantly supporting the 100,000 Homes movement, which is a housing first model. In their belief, they believe, or that's redundant, but basically the economics of the situations like you just described come into play when people are constantly forced into this loop between jail and the streets and jail and the streets. It causes the city and the state a lot of money. So what they discovered is that giving these people houses is actually more economically feasible. It's less hardship for the people that are causing the offenses, so they actually stay at home and they don't really cause trouble out in the street. So like really the solution to what you're saying is in the opinion of many different agencies, including international ones like the United Nations, is that they just need a house. They just need a home. And so to touch on that, I would like to tell you in a relevant and moderate way, because I have many things I can tell you, that if you relax your ordinances and relax your coding and policies and allow the homeless to take care of themselves and allow them to build their own houses, which is really the major problem and the major reason why a lot of people are homeless, is because they really can't just build their own house. And if you allow these things to happen, things to naturally occur rather than coming from above and suppressing or oppressing people to where they have to squander out and figure out more seditious ways of surviving, then they will find a more pleasant experience in your city of Boulder. And so I would like to ask you, what do you feel about the homeless just building their own homes?
I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, I forget which city, Portland maybe, but there's a tiny house movement. The one concern with that is code and making sure that there's code. So I liked that cooperative thing where it was kept to the city standards but was still tiny houses. I believe in the housing first. I believe all your points are true. It's kind of why the city's supporting additional of that. I think that's an interesting idea and one of the kinds of ideas I was coming down here to hear.
Cool. Okay, wait. The night of the vote for the behavior laws. Explain your vote. Your vote that made it unanimous. When nobody got up and spoke against these laws, or nobody got up and spoke for these laws. And please don't use protect homeless from the homeless, because if you haven't noticed here, our real predators are the police.
So I already explained the rationale for my vote. We have received tons of communication from people who, yes, were not there, writing us emails. I mean, I take comments from all kinds of different sources. And so I've received a lot of people who were concerned about it. And I have to say that what we tried to do was look at, is this imbalance, does it leave the judge with the discretion she needs, and really the focus for the judge and in the intent was people who are repeat offenders, whether it's protecting the homeless from the homeless or protecting anybody from people with bad behavior. If you're violating those particular ordinances, you probably have some kind of mistreatment that you're doing of other people. And about the police, I really don't know exactly how to address that except to say that we do have pretty good police force in Boulder in the sense that, and I apologize to Gaia because I don't think this will be widely shared by many of us, but they've worked a lot on community policing approaches where it's not just throw the book at them at first, but it's worked with them to understand what the challenges are.
Would you like to watch a video of me getting arrested for defending?
So I would really like to thank Sam. I may actually get a little bit of flack because this was a very engaging conversation. I'm sure all of us would love to have an open dialogue with our council members. But I personally believe, with all respect to Sam and all the other council members, there are people in this room who we need to respect their time and the efforts they've put forward to help our homeless community. And honestly, I'd trade any council for any one of y'all to have some time to talk. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to bring up Marcus, and he's going to talk a little bit about the impact that criminalization and laws can have and efforts we can have in our homeless community.
So I got here late, so I'm sure I see a bunch of wise faces in this room. So I'm sure a bunch of people have alluded to these points I'm about to say. I don't think I'm going to say anything mind-blowing about housing policies. Steve asked me to talk about housing policy, because I think that sometimes when we talk about homelessness, we forget that there's a history of homelessness. There's a reason why we're here today, and we live in this funny age where there's this thing called Google, but when city leaders pass bills, they sometimes pretend like there's not research done already about how policy affects homeless people, how policy affects our community as a whole, how policy has worked in the past, why we have homelessness in America, why we have a mass epidemic. So it's one of the biggest frustrations in my life is that I work with homeless folks, I do homeless advocacy, and yet it's one of the most unresearched topics. I think there should be schools dedicated to studying how America invented the common form of homelessness. So I need a couple of volunteers, because there's nothing to stick this on, is there? Maybe it's here. So I'm going to draw you a visual. I think visuals are... So in 1929, what happened?
Great Depression.
Stock market crash, right? So by 1936, about then, how many homeless people were in America? Guess.
Roughly 100,000 or more.
1.5 million homeless people, right? Then what happened? What happened around that time? What was the big governmental change? The New Deal, that's right. So 1940, right? So this is 1936. 1940, how many homeless people were in America? How many people were considered homeless by the state?
Probably 1.5 million.
5 million.
1940. 100,000. That's what the New Deal did. Homelessness went from over 1 million people to 100,000 people. So this is 1940. What about 1950? How many homeless people in America in 1950?
About the same.
Yeah, 100,000. What about 1960? What?
I said Vietnam War, and then they came back with no home.
Okay, but this is 1960, right? Like that, we're not seeing all the effects of that yet, right? So 1960, 100,000 people homeless in America. 1970, how many?
Roughly the same, maybe more, a little bit more.
Just a slight bit more. What about 100,000? 1980? About 100,000. Now, what happens in the early 80s? Captain,
Supply side trickle down economics known as neoliberalism.
So now I gotta change colors. So this is the New Deal, right? New Deal, right? 1978. The federal housing budget was $77.8 billion, right? That's 1978. By 83, oh, sorry, I should put a little, this is 77.8 billion, right? 1983, what do you think the federal housing budget was? Well, I mean, what?
Maybe half that?
How much do you think they cut it? In 5 years. 5 years.
I bet it was 10 billion.
77% cut
Star Wars somehow.
in 5 years. Okay, so what happened to homelessness? 1980, we still got 100,000 homeless people. What happened? By the end of the 80s, how much do you think homelessness increased?
Double. 100, 200.
About 77%.
Okay. It increased by 100-fold.
100,000 to 300,000.
Okay.
Right?
3 times. Okay.
Okay, so this is 1989, right? What happens during the 90s?
Clinton.
It doubles again. 600,000. Today, how many homeless people are in America on any given night? Just one night.
2.5 million?
No. One night, it's 600,000. We leveled out at about 600,000. We can't take any more.
That's because we're in prison for profit.
But that's one single night, right?
You mean out on the street?
That means so I'm using the broad definition of not having a fixed place, fixed, safe, and secure place to call home of your own. So that includes folks who are sleeping in their cars. That includes folks who are staying with their sister because their husband's beating them and they have to go. Annually, now most homeless people in America don't stay homeless forever. Most homeless people run into a crisis and it just takes some time to get back on their feet. Annually, we have 3.5 million people experience homelessness at some point every single year in America. Now, so this is our federal housing budget in 1978, right? $77.8 billion. What do you think?
Is that inflation adjusted, or that's what it was then?
Okay, so yeah, I gotta explain that. It's in 2004 consistent U.S. dollars.
Thank you.
So what do you think? What do you think our housing budget is now?
Well, surely with all how much money we made in between there, it would be higher, right, Marcus?
So last year, at 2014, the proposed budget that passed, $45.45 billion. So roughly half of what it was in 1978. But we have 6 times as many homeless people in America to deal with, and half the budget. So if
Sodom's dead.
If you're wondering why there's homelessness in America, if you're wondering, federal housing budget. That's the number one reason. Now I don't want to throw more numbers out at you, and I'm sure you guys had a lively discussion before I came. But the new trend is, well, it's not illegal. It's not legal to discriminate against black people anymore. It's not legal to discriminate against women. It's not legal to discriminate against people of other races. So, well, we found our new target population in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. We had the white flight out of the cities, and now what do we have?
Right back into gentrification.
We have the flight back into the city, right? We have this new urbanism with all this emphasis on walkable cities, which there's a lot of good to that. Thank you. There's a lot of good to that. But what people of privilege don't always think about is how does this affect the people underneath us. So when we have conversations about sustainability, the question I really want to pose is, does sustainability include the poorest of the poor? Is it just for the elite? Our urban gardens, is sustainability parks sustainable just for people who are rich enough to live near it? I forgot my next point. Well, I think I'm done.
Do you want to take these questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about tiny houses just for a bit?
Sure. So So there's a Westward article this week. I don't know if any of you all saw it. I mentioned it because Kristen and myself are building a tiny home, and we're working with Denver Homeless Out Loud to try to get more tiny homes built in the community for homeless people. The Westward article unfortunately makes it sound like Denver Homeless Out Loud is paying for me, a housed person, to get a tiny home, which is not the case. Kristen and I are paying for our own tiny home, and we've put funds towards the tiny home working group ourselves. We're not stealing a home from a homeless person. In fact, there's a group that I've been working with in Castle Rock. It's a school that a bunch of middle schoolers think they're smart enough to build a homeless person a home. And well, guess what? I just went down yesterday and I saw a home they built. And what did they build it out of? Recycled materials. And I can haul it with my truck. Now, as a city, this is something else that politicians pretend like isn't known. As a city, we have very little investment in homeless communities. The reason why I asked the question of the councilman in Boulder, remind me your name?
Sam.
Sam, great. I'm Marcus, but...
Uncle Sam, it's easier.
The reason why I asked is because there's this amazing trend where, as cities, we like to say, we're not going to pay for the homeless. We're not going to give a free handout, right? In Denver annually gives how many $1 million to homeless services as a city? Any guesses? $2 million. How many $1 million does Philadelphia, a comparable city to ours, but poorer per capita, get?
13.
$28 million. 14 times as much as we do. Now, but Denver has much stricter rules about who can be homeless and how they can be homeless in Denver. So the idea is we're not going to pay for homeless people. We're going to create laws to keep them out of the public space, right? We're going to create the new sundown town and say we're not discriminating against the homeless. You can live here, you just can't sleep here, you can't eat here, you can't sit here, you can't do anything. But we're separate but equal. You're one of us. So how much does Denver pay if they lock up a homeless person in Denver?
$80 a night?
$80 a night? Annually. How?
Like 60,000 or something.
$30,000.
$48,000. Now, how much does it cost to put someone in a house? So the coalition does it for $12,000 a year. So taxpayers are already paying this much. So, yeah.
I want to add this up to your timeline. In San Francisco, at first, Cisneros in the 90s basically decided to close down all the public housing. He said it was corrupt, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up taking a job at an architecture firm in San Francisco that built Hope 6 housing. And the guy who ran the firm had actually developed the plot that eventually people that were on the burbs would get bored and they'd want to come back into cities. And what were we going to do? Well, we're going to turn everything into townhouses and condos and gentrify and bring these people back, right? That was his plan. And I interviewed him about that, and he was saying, well, the poor people just have to leave town, there won't be any rental spaces, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it turned out that he had me look at this guy, Cisneros, and Cisneros had started a company called America Vista, where he built townhouses and converted apartments into condos in inner cities to make money off the fact that he had shut down all the public housing. And in San Francisco, the effects of that was the rents just skyrocketed. Everybody that had been in public housing went into studios and the SRO hotels, and there was no space left. There was a 1% vacancy, and everything skyrocketed. Cisneros made a killing when he got out of being the secretary for HUD because he had America Vista, and he made all this money in rebuilding inner cities and moving poor people out. So that's one thing. The other thing that needs to be in there is, in the 70s, there was a movement to kick everybody out of state hospitals because everybody became institutionalized, and that created a huge homeless population. And they did not put in services. They put out community mental health centers, and those community health centers, mental health centers were drugging people and putting them in chemical straitjackets and just left them on the street. And that's when you saw homelessness in Philly and New York and all these places skyrocket because people had no place to go, there were no services. And so there's a whole system that's been going for a long time that causes this crap. And it's what it is today because of that. San Francisco, you can't get a studio under $2,500 a month. A hotel room with a bath down the hall is $1,000 a month. People in benefits can't even get into those places. Much of
Right. It's a declining safety net that's not just limited to housing, right?
No, it's almost a conscious plan to move the poor out, to criminalize them, get rid of them, and then move the rich back in because they were kind of bored in their little suburban, safety zones. And now want to come back in San Francisco. At one point, there were companies that were coming because they were going to turn it into a playland for the rich. They actually said that we did some lobbying against it, did poetry benefits, and they actually came to me and threatened me because we put some people into the board of supervisors that voted down some of these projects, and they came to our poetry reading one night. We're like, well, it's your fault that we lost these $1 million contracts and blah blah blah. We were just sitting there going, my God, we're just poets, And they were that threatened because there was this whole plan to just completely move everybody out of the city that was poor.
Yeah. So one last statistic, and I'm tired of hearing myself laugh, is how much, if you work 40 hours a week to make a minimum wage in Denver, how much do you make a month?
About $1,200 before taxes.
Right. Yeah. Around $1,200 if you work 40 hours a week. Right. So, and what's market rate housing? So in Denver, a one bedroom that's considered market rate is between $1,200 and $1,300.
Qualify for public housing. And people are working. So you're waiting list.
So what is affordable housing, right? Affordable housing is the councilman from Boulder talked about how they're increasing their affordable housing. Right next door to my house at the Catholic Worker, I help run the Catholic Worker where we take homeless women, families, and couples. And many of our guests are on fixed incomes, right? That's less if you get SSDI, if you're a disabled vet or whatever, and you have a fixed income from the government, it's what, about $700?
My son got about $850.
Okay, so her son got about $850. Some of my guests get $725.
That's SSI.
That's SSI. Okay. So right next door, there's going to be quote unquote affordable housing being built, and so I asked the developer, okay, what does affordable housing mean? Well, you have to make less. You have to make between 30 and 50% of the area median income, AMI. Well, in Denver, the area median income includes not only downtown Denver, but also Cherry Creek and all these other places. So area median income in Denver is about $70,000. So I asked, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that mean figure-wise? Like, how much is a one bedroom? Well, it's about $1,000 a month. That's affordable housing. So when your city leaders begin to talk about affordable housing, you have to know that who they're really shooting for is not even teachers. Teachers can't really afford $1,000 for a one bedroom. They're talking about people who have upper middle class jobs. They're not talking about my guests who are trying to find housing. They're not talking about the 68,000 people who wake up every morning in America and realize that they're 68 years old. Every morning, 68,000 people wake up in America. So, like, if we think about a housing problem now, and we know homelessness is created in this country by a housing problem. In the Great Depression, when there was 1.5 million homeless people in America, there's still cheap motels. There's still ways that you can find shelter, right? We've invented this new state of being where an epidemic of people don't have any physical shelter. Now in Denver, it's legal to cover yourself.
Yet there are houses for every homeless person.
Right, yeah. So, but if we think this is a problem now, wait 10 years. Like, all the baby boomers are going to be wrapped around the block looking for housing, looking for food stamps, looking for food pantries. If we don't figure this crap out now, but I think one of the issues, and now this is my only piece about personal responsibility to you all, is to stay aware. Because I think homelessness, I provide housing for homeless folks, and I think that if you go to the rescue mission, you go to most of the programs in the city, the sermon that's preached is personal responsibility. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? It's never what do we as a community have a responsibility to do? Because if that was the conversation going on, then we'd be talking about this. As a city, we'd be talking about a 100-year history of how we invented homelessness, how we're perpetuating homelessness. But the sermon that's preached to homeless people is work hard, go through our program, get sober, and then after you're the perfect person, maybe you'll get a house. Maybe we'll award you a house. After you sit on a waiting list for a year and a half. But what I want to instill in y'all as far as personal responsibility is pay attention and be rooted in one place, paying attention for a while. Downtown, they tore down a lot of public housing right over there, and they made all sorts of promises. In the Ballpark neighborhood, they tore down blocks and blocks of public housing. They promised to rebuild it. It's not rebuilt anywhere near downtown. They passed the camping ban. They promised a 24-hour shelter, increased the services. They haven't committed to any more funding. So.
Well, they had bike paths to spend money on.
Yeah.
That was what they committed to.
So I have some little piece of propaganda. I only have 4 copies.
More motorbikes. More motorbikes.
Y'all can have it.
Can we auction them off? Would it be
Yeah.
get loud?
Yeah, I mean, I had another council member actually tout the 10% affordable housing at a 5 Points Housing Conference the other day. I think it's important that we point out that means that 90% of their housing is unaffordable. Period. It's very important to recognize that. So this event we've learned a lot. We've reviewed a lot. The second kind of portion of this, which we've actually going to limit down to about a half hour now, was inspired by some conversations I had with some folks about the tactics that the boycott the camping ban folks are doing. So the boycott the camping ban have boycotted Snooze AM Eatery, boycotted Home Restaurant, boycotted, are now currently boycotting Tattered Cover, and are boycotting Tammy Door's personal residence. I am not kidding you. I have had people claim that the Golden Turd Awards that the boycott folks passed out were acts of violence against our city leaders, against the people in power that they gave them to. And I've heard a lot of conversation about how the boycott was, say, undermining efforts of other groups. And so I've invited the organizers of the boycott to come up here and answer the questions. if y'all have concerns about their tactics, if y'all have just a moment and you want to express to them how their efforts are hurting yours, please speak up, because now's your time. And I will say, it's boycott, folks. They're not going to be quiet. They will answer back. Please, we're going to try not to be offended by passion, all right? So if there is a lot of passion in the room and things get a little heated, don't be offended by that. It means that we're all trying our best to help. So if y'all wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to come up now. If you guys maybe just start things off, if each one of you would like to introduce yourself and maybe tell me why you're boycotting and why you believe in the tactic of nonviolent direct action.
Okay. I'm Janet Matson, and I don't know what else to do but boycott. It's inhumane what they're doing, and I won't stop until it's repealed.
My name is Eric Furlow, and I support this action because I think that we are on the forefront of, I think the homeless issue is on the forefront where the public meets capitalism. And I feel like that's what we started around all evening. We talk about what's the basis of this problem, or we ask, I don't know why cities would do this. And it's plain, it's systematic, it's capitalism, and we have to fight it. And I believe, at the Tattered Cover, in fact, I believe we're right there on the front lines. And we need everybody's help, because we've got now, the police department has figured out that as long as they wait for us to have diminished numbers, they can come in and make a couple token arrests, quiet us, and then figure out that people will plead or whatever and will go away. So we actually need help, whether you agree with us or not. You've got to jump in, because we are engaging in the fight. This has started, and I guess it's time for people to come in and choose a side. And we ask you, what side are you on?
What's your day job, Eric?
I sell books.
Thank you.
I'm Irene Clark, and I just think it's despicable that anyone with a heart or a soul could think that criminalizing someone who is poorest of the poor, they're so poor they have nowhere to live. Anyone who thinks that that is the right way to deal with this situation is beyond saving. And I think we need to be in their faces, shaming them for doing this. It is despicable. As the United Nations said, it is a human rights violation. It is inhumane, and it is despicable, and that's what they say about this. So if you're criminalizing the homeless and you're not standing up and fighting against it, then you are complicit, and you are doing human rights violations. Any questions?
This may be real quick show. How many folks want to ask a question? Come on.
What? I'm not sure what's going on here, but I'm trying to understand. You have a boycott on certain
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I guess, real quickly, if you would, somebody explain what the boycott tactic.
All right. Well, so this is the third business that we are targeting. We targeted Snooze, we targeted the Palm for very extended periods of time, a year nearly, each one, and got a capitulation and got that business to write a letter and to ask the city to repeal the ban. And that's what we're going for, because, everybody showed up at City Hall when they were considering the ban and spoke against it, and they didn't listen to anybody but the businesses, so we're targeting the businesses.
So this is for Snooze and
Well, there's a bunch of businesses.
Now, Starbucks. I mean,
well, oh yeah, there's a lot of them. About 100. I don't know. There's more.
Just
the Colorado Restaurant Association, which was 100% support about this, has over 10,000 businesses.
Wow.
So we have had to pick and choose.
Well, now there you go. So it's a very contentious issue that we've chosen tattered cover because that's kind of everybody's favorite business, and it's it's an independent bookstore, etc. But why should we give preferential treatment to a business that says it's progressive and acts liberal, when in actuality it enabled the other creeper businesses. It gave them kind of a liberal cover to be able to say, hey, look, tattered cover's coming along. This must not be so bad.
And they should have known better.
Okay, thank you.
So if we could, let's go ahead and maybe take staff for questions. Everybody with a question, please raise your hand.
I think she's had her hand up the longest.
Okay. Katrina, 1, 2, anyone else? 3, anybody? 4. All right, okay. 1, 5, 1, 3.
Does the tattered cover say they support the band?
Yeah.
Does the tattered cover say they support the band?
Outright? No, I think technically what they want to maintain is that they have the right to remain neutral on it.
You say that support that because they are in the hot.
Yes, that's right.
Well, they're part of the partnership.
Yes, they are part of the partnership. They pay dues before and after.
But they are also a part of the ACLU.
They're also part of the ACLU.
Who oppose the band.
You know, and they might.
Understand why you think that this is who they
You understand why they're being targeted?
Because they never came out to support.
Outright. And this but the ACLU is
inhumane. They should come out against it.
But they're not part of the ACLU.
But Katrina, they're probably good Christians too. You know, I mean, we can't just. You know, Snooze was telling us, oh, you know what all we do.
You have to cut it shorter though, because you were right about Snooze. Because they opened up a new restaurant. Right in the middle of that area.
That's what it raised. That's what got me started. Yeah, that's what got me started. Seeing him talk. Yeah.
So can you say it upfront what?
She understood why we went after Snooze because they opened up a restaurant next to the Samaritan House. So she understands that. She just doesn't understand why we're going after the tattered cover. Yeah. So I think it's a genius.
It's definitely elevated the conversation, I'll tell you.
So I would like to just jump into that a little bit. The conversations when y'all were discussing like what targets to go to next, there was a lot of conversations about, well, impact. What's going to have the most impact? Well, Joyce has spent a lot of years trying to build up a community reputation, and she has pretty successfully. And if the tattered cover came out against the ban, strategically we think a lot of other
businesses in the city that have been staying on the sidelines would come out against the ban as well. So strategically, it just makes sense.
And we went to her, and we actually sat down with, the three of us sat down with Joyce for over an hour, talking to her, saying, you know, you are this liberal beacon in the community, and you have this reputation on being on the people's side. Why are you not on the people's side on this issue? And so that was really, I mean, we really pled to her, please come out against the ban. And they refused. They refused to take a side, but yet now they have 5 new locations opening up at the airport, which is another member of the Downtown Denver Partnership.
Union Station.
And Union Station. So they're making a lot of money off of not coming out against the urban camping ban and playing their role.
2 on the section.
Another question, but comment. I'm just told by a young fellow outside that Denver, Colorado has the highest cost of rent or highest cost of living than anywhere else in the country outside of any coastal cities. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So we're the most expensive city in the country outside of any coastal cities in the entire country to live. So just a comment. I didn't know that being a Denver, Colorado native. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
3 on set.
Nonviolent direct action. You know, who's opposed to that in this room? I'm sure not. I think that's a wonderful tactic. I totally support that. I think maybe it's the impact. I don't know. So the question I have is, if we look at which tactics are most likely to move us forward toward overturning the urban, because I want the urban camping ban overturned. I don't believe that, we're stuck with it forever. So just if you could talk about in terms of, I'm sure you've talked about what tactics and strategies will most advance your goal of overturning the camping ban. Could you explain how this tactic of boycotting Joyce will move toward overturning the camping? Because what I see, and correct me or explain to me how I'm wrong, is that it's not only just right or wrong, was she right, but is this gaining more supporters on our side, or is it turning more people against our side?
Oh no, we've gained a lot of momentum, and one of the biggest things we've seen is when we're standing outside of, especially on the East Colfax location, we just stand there with our signs, and people come up and talk to us. They talk to us and ask us what's going on, and then we explain to them how essentially the poorest people have had their survival acts criminalized. They're pretty appalled. And we've had people not walk in there and buy a book because they stopped and talked to us.
Yeah, we really do see support. On the sidewalk, we see support. So the criticism comes at us that we're potentially alienating allies, let's say the liberal allies, and I'm not sure how accurate that would be. I mean, for me, I feel as Occupy, I think our role has been to radicalize people. I think we're fighting against this tremendous inertia, lack of inertia from people who keep thinking that they can solve problems through the system, et cetera. The usual things that are thrown at revolutionaries. And I think we've realized that people have to wake up. We have to convince them that it's going to take thinking outside of the box and thinking kind of against what their impulses might be. So for me, it seems like a great opportunity to push people to think a little bit more. If they're going to say, oh, how can you, what's the most blessed of businesses but an independent bookstore? Well, you know what? A library. That's not for profit. I mean, we can't necessarily expect that for-profit businesses are going to be thinking about poor person on the street. So let's idolize libraries. Or let's hope that, you know, this independent bookstore can do the right thing.
I'm for on stack. I got a different question, but I'm actually going to follow up on this because there's a lot of people in the room who spend their days talking to these allies. And the reason we put this together is because apparently some of those allies have been upset by this or have been pushed away by this. And I would love for some of those stories to be told. I would love to know, for these folks to know, if there are specific instances that their tactics are being brought up in meetings by people who are helping to get or provide services that think that this has actually hurt their efforts. Anybody in the room?
I'd also like to hear people who have criticisms on the issue, what types of solutions they have. Suggestions.
So I'm going to open that up. So like my time real quick on the set. I'm going to open it. Is anybody in the room? Unfortunately, the people who reached out to me personally upset about these tactics aren't here. I apologize for that. They didn't show up. But folks in this room, I know somebody in this room has an instance. Please.
Sure. So I help run the Catholic Worker. Ben might discuss. I help run the Catholic Worker, so pretty much still a full-time volunteer. Spend my days with people who are currently experiencing homelessness. Think about it a lot. I get very uncomfortable in situations where anyone's being shouted at, whether or not that's enthusiastic shouting or angered shouting, and that could just be my personal preference for a different kind of I think it's wonderful that you sat down with her and had a one-on-one or three-on-one conversation. I'm all for that. I think the more we can have personal conversations and give that person the opportunity to be awakened rather than tell them that they are not and not really give them the option. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I personally haven't gotten involved because I don't want to tell someone they're bad before giving them the opportunity to engage in a different way. Not that's what you're doing, but that's why I've sort of...
I can offer just a little bit of backstory on this. And another gentleman who was involved, he had actually been emailing with them for about a year before we actually boycotted them. And we didn't go into this without no line of communication. We conversed by email, and then we went and met with them. We actually went there for about 2 months doing a homeless beat without doing a boycott, just to give them the opportunity, because we didn't really want to boycott them, you know what I mean? We were like, this is not, this would not be, we knew it would be a hard fight. We knew that, yes, it would probably upset a lot of people, but we also knew it would also open up lines of communication where they hadn't been. And if we weren't doing something right, the Denver Post would not be trying to burn us in effigy on a regular basis.
I just also want to say that a lot of times at protests, the violence comes from the police.
It does.
And very rarely from the protesters. So, I encourage you to participate and kind of see what goes on there, because it can be uncomfortable, but you can walk away at any time. And a lot of the violence, though, does come from the other side.
We never had violence come from our end.
But something that we learned is that for the next one, what we want to do is before, and see, we were taken by surprise because when it be capitulation, we hadn't predicted it. But now we know to plan ahead and to invite, let's say, potential targets. We'll invite them to come to the tattered cover and say, hey, do you want this to happen to you? Because what I think we presumed that Joyce maybe knew what happened in front of Snooze. Maybe she knew how ugly it got in front of the Palm. And so we kind of I think kind of came off as extortionist. You know, when we're sitting with her going, we don't want to hurt you. You know, we don't want to do this to you. And she and her manager are sitting there probably with no clue about how destructive it really would be. Because, you know, we're reaching so many people driving by, and so many people see us and don't have the chance to ask questions. And all they're remembering is, oh, apparently, boycott, tatter, cover. So at least we know now, and I think we might be more effective and persuasive with the business if we actually say, look, take a look at what, you know, what this kind of thing looks like. Yeah, what's coming your way. This is one of the most heartbreaking things that I saw on our first day of full protest at Tattered Cover. Was the manager was outside and he saw us with bullhorn, and you know, he said, "Hey, what's going on? I didn't know Occupy has bullhorns." And you know, and I thought, oh my goodness, he's thinking of the people's microphone. No, sorry, dude. Occupy Denver is about bullhorns. And so you just know, oh, he didn't see this coming at all. And so how we can bring them around, I don't know, but all we know is to keep pushing.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to start sending them videos of protests.
That's great. So just to follow up with that, and I guess this is kind of just to follow up with that, and this is kind of, I guess, my comment for the day. Every action is going to have a reaction, and whether or not you're expecting it, I mean, this is kind of a reaction to their action, but every action and reaction are built with only one of two motives, love or fear. And if you're doing everything out of love, you'll never lose. I guarantee you'll never lose. All you need to do is stand up for those that you are and make sure that everybody's accounted for, and you can't lose. It's just how it is. Just make sure that everything is coming from love instead of fear. Don't be scared that she's going to say, oh, no, this is, and call the cops. Well, fine. Call the cops. I love you just the same. Fine. That's it.
And we just had a couple of from a woman that lived up above Tattered Cover in subsidized housing because we were causing her not to get to sleep. It was like 7 o'clock.
Sure, yeah.
The next week, she came down and ate with us. And hollered out her window and thanked me for the bean soup.
Woo!
So guys, this venue is awesome, and it actually is open mic nights for performers in about 10 minutes. So we're going to have to wrap up pretty quick, but please everybody stay and watch the open mic. I'm sure they love an audience. We are on number 6 on stack right now.
Actually, I feel like if we are going to get somewhere, we need to go different tactics and doing different things. I was wondering if in this gathering, anybody is interested kind of running and replacing our city council men and women who created these laws for us with us. You know, because I always look at kind of constructive way of doing things. I mean, they're not better than us. We may not be better than them, but why not doing that, replacing them if they continue continuously creating laws against humanity?
I'm actually considering running next year. We'll see what happens. We'll see.
Oh, and Reno's running for mayor. Where's Reno? Reno for mayor.
Steve, have you announced?
9 on staff. Yep, you'll get number 9. Okay, so we're on tier 8. We're on number 7 on stack, real quick. Sorry if I didn't explain it. You got to remember your number on stack.
I think that's it.
No? Number 7? Teresa, I know you didn't forget your number on stack.
It's not me. I didn't.
All right, I guess Teresa's next on stack.
No, it's not me. I would not. I'll take the spot, but give it to her.
Was it you? You're going to pass? Okay. Number 8 on stack, I think that was Benjamin.
Benjamin, did you have a question?
Yeah, I would just like to say that anytime anybody's upset with the boycott, a very simple solution to that is to go to the boycott and eat some of the food, and you will no longer be upset, I guarantee it.
You got another one over here.
No, it's along with what this lady had said. If you were, since next year is an election year, and nearly every seat is up for election, because of the district line changes, if you would consider doing a referendum.
Yeah. Referendum? Yeah. Well, actually, let me just tell you, this is my own personal thing I'm working on, and it's called the People's Picnic, and what I figure is we have a lot of lazy activists who think they can be armchair activists. But what if we could, make it so that someone could just leave their house one time a year, go have a picnic, and then when they come have a picnic, we have people with ballot initiatives come together, gather their signatures for the ones they agree, and if we could build momentum on this and do it around the cities and around the state, imagine what we could get on the ballot next year. We could get all kinds of things on the ballot and get things pushed, and we could overrule our elected officials who are not representing us.
Nice job.
So, peoplespicnic.org.
Can I answer your question?
No, not really. Okay, sorry.
So, referendum next year on the to-do list, I think probably be a good idea. 10 on spec.
Oh, that's me. I just wanted to come back to sort of addressing the question that you asked earlier, Steve, about what allies were pushing back against the boycott. I just feel like that question was never really answered. So as someone that works with Denver Homeless Out Loud, it's something we have to deal with a lot, like on a daily basis practically, in terms of service providers, mostly service providers, identifying us, D-Hole, Denver Homeless Out Loud, as the boycott organization. So that's a dynamic that comes up a lot. So Denver Homeless Out Loud is a consensus-based group. We make decisions on consensus, and there's not a consensus within D-Hole about the boycotts, about the tactics or whatnot. So because of that, not because of that. That's part of it. But I mean, there's the fact that we don't have a consensus on it as a group, and then there's the other most obvious fact, which is that we aren't the group that's doing it. It's very obviously the fact that these lovely, amazing people up here are the group that is holding down twice a week doing the boycott. But that has been conflated, and so I think it's just interesting to note. I'll just note this in terms of interest, that service providers do very frequently express discomfort or dislike with the boycotts, saying, oh, well, you can't come in here and survey because you guys do that boycott at Tammy Dora's house, and that just is overstepping the boundaries to go right to someone's house to boycott, or a lot more, I think, on Tammy Dora's thing. Other people don't like the shadow cover thing, but in the service provider world, I've heard a lot more in terms of Tammy Dora. And I think that is a lot because Tammy Dora is the president of the Downtown Denver Business Partnership, and she's on the Homeless Commission, the commission, Mayor's Appointed Commission on Homelessness, which we've talked about before. And so she is talking with these service providers on a regular basis. She controls them. She controls all of their persons, exactly. She is the reason for this. She's the reason that all of these service providers are not coming out in the way that they could be. So I don't know. I think just that relationship is something that's important to note. And one last thing on that is sort of this triangle that we've kind of alluded to, where we have Tammy Dore threatening service providers, saying if you're associated with Denver Homeless Out Loud, then we're not going to fund you or we're not going to help you or whatever. When it's not even Denver Homeless Out Loud that's doing this, we're not doing these actions. It's not us, we're not doing these actions. But it gets associated with that, and so therefore then the threats are coming from Tammy Dore to the service providers, which is really messed up. But I don't know.
So actually, out of respect for this space, which actually is booked for 9, we're going to have to cut staff and end it there. I would like to, real quick, is there anything specifically the boycott could do to help you with that? Is that like a really strong statement that D-Hole is not part of it, or?
Well, I'd like to address, I think we're part of Occupy. We are Occupy, and so are you. So I think it would be actually a strong thing for people to own up to being part of a movement, and don't let the disruptors try to tear us apart. I'm sorry if you want to go into the service and not be part of a revolution, then I suppose you can throw your barriers up. But I think that we're strongest if we are saying we are Occupy. We want to affect systemic change, and we're not going to be extorted and blackmailed to be weaker than we are. We're united, and we are going to take you down.
And that's what Tammy Dore is doing with these service providers. It's called extortion.
Can I say for the record, Denver Homeless Out Loud is not Occupy.
No. That's fine. That's fine, and I don't take offense greatly. I'm not a Catholic either. So actually, I am. I am a Catholic.
I'd like to say one thing too. The ballpark neighborhood has having issues with the 24-hour shelter, right? And instead of putting bathrooms, they hired more police officers to address the urination in the alley.
Right, because you can control when you have to pee, right?
There's no more bathrooms up. That's what you can do.
City Council is proposing increased police patrol and power washing of that neighborhood. It's coming soon.
Yeah, progressive, anti-helpful laws.
And I'm not saying we can't stop the conversation. We can continue the
But we gotta
conversation.
get the hell out of here.
But we don't even have to get out of here. I'm sure we'd love to listen to some folks before. But we do need to respect the space.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, guys, everybody.